Hello friends. Today we are talking about lenses. Not just any lenses though, not your kit lens, rather lenses of extremely wide apertures. How wide? f1.8, f1.4, wider? Yes, there is a whole world of lenses that can open up to f1.2, f1.1, even under f1. These lenses can be very inexpensive, particularly for the aperture settings that they support. How is this possible? And are there compromises? Before we dig into it though, I want to thank the sponsor of this portion of today's video. You love them. I love them. KEH. If you're new here and you don't know who KEH is, they buy and sell used photography gear. Raymond and I have used them to sell our own gear since before we started working with them, and we've purchased numerous items from them over the years. Since we are discussing very wide aperture lenses, let's take a quick look. I filtered these by maximum aperture, but you can filter these results down by your camera brand and mount, or a bunch of other things. And you can see a whole slew of them up and down the price range: modern lenses, vintage lenses. I have a couple lenses that I check KEH for regularly. One of them is the Sigma 35mm f1.2 art lens. I don't have it in stock right now, but I will keep checking. So when you head over to KEH to check out wide aperture lenses, after you've watched this video, of course, and liked it and subscribed to the channel, I have a link for you in the description along with a code so that you can get a discount on your purchase. Incidentally, if you have some gear that you would like to sell or at least get a no-risk quote on, I have a link in the description for you too, plus a code that will add a bonus on top of your quote. Check it out. It's good for you and it's good for me because using those links helps let KEH know to continue working with us. All right, let's move on. Let's begin with a lens that I just mentioned, and I reviewed it here on the channel a while back. The Sigma 35mm f1.2 DGDN art lens. We did an extensive review of the E mount version, and we recently borrowed the L mount version. Those are the two mounts that this lens is offered in. One thing that we learned about this lens is that it's sharp and renders extremely well at any available aperture, all the way to its widest, f1.2. And for the E mount version, which I used on our Sony Alpha 7R4, we previously owned that, the resolution of the camera combined with the extreme high detail that the lens provides is simply unmatched for cropping in compared to anything else that we've used. Now is actually a good time to discuss why one may desire a very wide aperture lens. With a wide aperture, you can achieve a very shallow depth of field, but it's often the low light capability that draws people to wide aperture lenses. The wider the aperture, the more light you are allowing to hit your camera's sensor, which means that you can keep the shutter speed quicker or you can keep your ISO sensitivity lower. Those mean a more crisp photo. I won't go into any more of that in this video, but if you aren't solid on the foundations of exposure, I do have a complete course where I go through the basics of photography in detail. It's free, and I will add a link to it in the description of this video. Back to the Sigma 35mm lens though. You may have noticed that this lens is large for a prime lens, plus it's heavy, and the price is about $1,200 here in the US. For a lens with one focal length, it is a commitment from your wallet and from your muscles, but the results are truly unlike any other prime lens that we've used. And it may be better than any that we will use. In terms of competition, Sigma's own lenses, the 35mm f1.4 DG-HSM art lens, even the 35mm f2 DGDN Contemporary is another rival. While the contemporary f2 lens does not have the f1.2 aperture and the overall impeccable sharpness of the art lenses, it is smaller and roughly half the price of the f1.2 art lens. Having options like this is extremely consumer friendly. Of course, there are other 35mm prime lenses out there that open up to pretty wide apertures. Another newer lens for a popular mirrorless mount opens up to 0.95, the Nikon Noct f.95 58mm lens for Z mount. You haven't seen me show this lens on my channel, but I did have one in my hands for a few days, awkwardly, due to a shipping mix-up. However, good steward of lenses that I am, and understanding that mistakes can and will happen, I quickly shipped the lens back to sender. As the angel on my shoulder told me to do, the devil on my shoulder was just mad that the lens was going away instead of getting the full review treatment, but I always try to do the right thing. And that is an $8,000 lens, and it has the aperture, size, weight, and quality to match that price. Newer, larger mirrorless mounts like the Z mount make these wide apertures possible with large glass elements, plenty of research, and truly precision engineering. Now, what if I told you that you could achieve very wide apertures, wider than f1.4, at prices lower than $8,000 and even lower than $1,200, with lenses that are smaller too? You can. Let's take a look at some of those options. First, let's start with a name brand lens. It is a pretty famous lens in its own right, the Nikkor 50mm f1.2 lens for f-mount. This is a Nikkor AI manual focus lens that will work with older f-mount film bodies, DSLRs, and Z-mount Nikon cameras with the FTZ adapter. It is exclusively manual focus, and it's not available new, but thanks to the secondhand market with the likes of KEH, that's where I got this one. There's other buy, sell, trade outfits, and individuals might be selling them, so you can purchase it today. Let's take a look at what KEH has right now. There are options of various levels of quality up to $500 for an excellent copy. Okay, so what's the catch? Not much. When working with an older f-mount lens designed in the film era, there was no such thing as megapixels. Lenses were designed to be super sharp on the film stock that was available, which varies. This lens won't hold up to zooming way in on a photo captured with a 67 megapixel sensor like that Sigma 35mm art lens would. But this 50mm is very sharp and it renders images beautifully. This is a flagship lens from the analog days. It's softer at f1.2 than at the narrower apertures, but the quality of the out-of-focus areas is beautiful, which makes the in-focus areas seem that much sharper to the eye. We've even used this lens for astrophotography. The f1.2 aperture makes the lens very inviting for low light work, like astrophotography, but the corrections that are in place on modern lenses aren't there. And if you are shooting stars with this lens, the stars at the edges will be distorted with chroma, but overall, your astro images will render beautifully. It depends on what you're after. If you're after extreme technical sharpness, newer lenses might be more appealing to you. And one thing that I do need to mention about f-mount lenses is that they can be adapted to virtually any modern mirrorless system. And the adapter that you use needs no electronics because this lens doesn't know how to communicate electronically with any of your cameras anyway. Let's stick to 50mm, but open up to f1.1 with the 7 Artisans 50mm f1.1 lens for Leica M mount. Okay, first, let's stop right there. I know most of you do not have M mount cameras. I don't either, but like the Nikon F mount, the M mount can be adapted to almost any mirrorless system. The adapters are extremely inexpensive and no electronic information needs to be communicated from a 7 Artisans M mount lens to the camera body. You have manual focus and a compact lens, and it is less than $400 brand new. We're approaching that aperture of that Noct f.95 lens we talked about earlier, but for $370 instead of $8,000. There's got to be a difference though, right? Sharpness at the widest apertures will be better on the more expensive lens. But I don't want to discourage you from looking at the 7 Artisans f1.1 lens or even discourage you from purchasing it. Understand though, particularly at apertures from f1.1 to about f1.4, you will have softer images. However, they will have a beautiful quality to them, and I would use this lens at or near wide open for portraits or ethereal landscapes. But if you're going to pixel peep for technical sharpness and want the least amount of glare and lens flare possible at super wide apertures, you would have to look at a more expensive lens. For the price of this lens though, the flexibility to use it across multiple systems and the ability to open to f1.1, albeit with a softer look, it's a good value. It's just a matter of whether that's something you're after. The final 2 more options that we are discussing today are portrait lenses. First, let's talk about one of Viltrox's latest lenses, the 75mm f1.2 for Sony, Fuji, and Nikon Z mount. We have the Nikon version, and before we go further, I do need to mention that this is an APS-C lens, so your angle of view will be just over 100mm full frame equivalent. From our hands-on experience with the Nikon version of this lens, don't let the APS-C factor discourage you, particularly if you will be using it with a higher resolution camera body. The lens retails for $550. On APS-C, I would consider this to be short telephoto, but with an f1.2 aperture, which is stunning. The results are sharp across the aperture range. We've used it for 2 photo shoots, one of which incorporated products, and everything looked great. Through the capture and editing process, it never came into play that this was an APS-C lens. With mirrorless, the viewfinder adjusts automatically, so you're still seeing a large, bright image through the viewfinder. Even though we were working with 1 to 2 lights in both cases, so we had plenty of light, we wanted a shallow depth of field, so that f1.2 aperture was key. We do have other portrait lenses for full frame, including another Viltrox lens, but very quickly, because of the f1.2 aperture, this lens has been the portrait lens that we've been reaching for the most. It's even a little surprising to us, but we're going with it. And in addition to our full-frame Nikon Z7 and Z9 bodies, we have an APS-C Z body, so we're able to move the lens over to that Z30 and back to the Z7 with a very similar experience between the two. We'll take it. Finally, the TT Artisan 90mm f1.25 M mount lens. Manual focus, full frame, f1.25. It's great for portraits, irrespective of whichever mirrorless system you have. Just add an inexpensive adapter and you're shooting portraits old school. Sharp at most apertures, like the 7 Artisan's 50mm f1.1 lens, it is softer when shot at its widest apertures. It has beautiful velvety out of focus areas and fantastic rendering of skin tones and the surrounding environment. What's not to like about that? Look at the separation between me and the background in these portraits. The background is some distance away, but full frame combined with the f1.25 aperture is just lovely. And keep in mind, we were shooting in near darkness here. This lens is available in a series of different mirrorless mounts, but since there is not electronic communication with your camera, if you do bounce between systems or shoot multiple systems, the 1 M mount lens with adapters to suit the brands that you do have is a practical solution. I love shopping for a lens like this and not having to worry about whether I'm locking myself in to one single lens mount with it. That was a few different options and price points for going beyond f1.4. Is it necessary to go to these super wide apertures? That's up to you. What I like is having options from very inexpensive to expensive, with varying quality and character among those options. Sometimes the less expensive, lighter options are my choice. There's less pressure and often less weight. And with each of the less expensive wide aperture prime lenses that we have used, the technical limitations produced wonderful artistic effects, perhaps even supporting a vintage look, from a time when lenses with overall lower quality were the norm and were premium items. That said, a modern, sharp, wide aperture lens like that Sigma 35mm f1.2 is just perfect for when the timing and circumstances call for nothing less than magnificent quality. Tell me about your favorite super duper wide aperture lenses, whether they are something you own or are on your wish list. Or are other things more important to you than squeezing out f1.2, f1.1, f.95? Let us all know down in the comments what you're after if it's not Aperture. Thank you to KEH for continuing to support this channel. Remember, I do have links in the description for you. In fact, I added links directly to a number of very wide aperture lenses on KEH. And as always, thank you for watching.